We begin by acknowledging the traditional owners and custodians of the lands on which this podcast is recorded and shared. We pay our respects to elders past and present, and to the ongoing storytelling traditions of First Nations people across the many countries of this continent. Werda, welcome to Solid Yarns, a podcast about First Nations creatives and their practices. We're here to chat about how industry partners and First Nations creators can best work together. Each episode, we'll hear from a First Nations creative and the client they worked with. We'll hear about the project they made, the challenges they faced, and the lessons they learned. This episode, artist and designer Tyrown Waigana.
Respect feels like, just giving me flexibility and feeling like my artwork, my opinion based off of my profession is valued, not just like, nitpicking and saying, telling me to create a pink rabbit. And when I go away and create a pink rabbit, they want a red dragon.
And Mond Qu, the director of creative design agency UnitedMake.
Working with First Nations, we always come from an angle of understanding and curiosity. So rather than dictating everything at the beginning, it was more of a collaborative approach.
Tyrown and Mond worked on a project for Australia Post. The works at the Australia Post head office in Melbourne reflected stories from different postcodes around the country. The project raised important questions about the diversity of First Nations art and how to brief artists. For example, how do we veer away from the notion that all First Nations artwork is dot painting and instead embrace the diversity of styles that have been passed down across different language groups and communities? I'm Emran Japanunga Sultan. I am a West Narrandera, Luritja and Kugatha man, creative artist, cultural consultant and co-founder of Solid Lines. This is episode 2 of Solid Yarns.
My name's Tyrown Waigana. I'm a Wardani Noongar, Yaru and Ait Kodal man. So I have connections here in southwest Western Australia through to the Kimberley and Saba Island and the Torres Strait. I'm a multiple disciplinary artist and designer. I do graphic design, illustration, sculpture, animation and painting. A lot of my artwork and stuff I do covers like the everyday myth, rhetoric around Indigenous identity, contemporary Indigenous design. I love to create things that are like monotonous and extravagant at the same time. Things that like kind of speak to lots of different people on different levels and like trying to capture this like, importance of everyday things we kind of pass over. And then, some of it is like social commentary, a little bit of political commentary around, Indigenous identity and other things that kind of don't seem right or align in society.
Tyrown was one of a number of artists to be commissioned to create work for Australia Post, working with creative agency UnitedMake.
My name is Mond Qu. I'm the director of UnitedMake. I basically was trained as an architect, but then I forayed into different types of design from sculptures all the way to architecture. UnitedMake is a multidisciplinary design studio. It's based in Richmond in Melbourne. And we basically look at, ways of helping the world or providing interesting stories or ways of contributing the design to problem solve. For the Australia Post project, our sort of role was placemaking. So how can we make a place come alive? And we thought that the best way to do that was through art. So art as a vehicle for placemaking. Because if you think about any generic office, every floor is usually the same. Every lighting situation is the same. And, you've been to those lobby spaces where the artwork hasn't really been considered. It's probably some stock image they printed out and put on the wall. And we took that as an opportunity to think not only about wayfinding, not only about, what people will be thinking when they go into the building, but thirdly, what stories would they tell?
With the Australian Post brief, my briefing was to comment on Western Australia. So, having to create something that speaks to that vastness and like connection and network, but also create something that had pretty tight deliverables. Like it had to be something that was mountable on a wall, then could be taken off. And I think at the time I had I was under a lot of pressure, had a lot of work on. So it had to be something that was kind of low labor intensity for me, but also high impact artwork that could be, spread across the wall and enjoyed by onlookers.
We came up with strategy of, from level 2 to level 8 is where Australia Post would take over the building, and it fit perfectly with all the postcodes. And as Australia Post is a national company, each floor represented a different state. So we thought, wouldn't it be poetic to actually look for artists in those states to tell the stories of their understanding? And absolutely within that diversity, First Nations came up.
So for Australia Post, I did several large-scale paintings on canvas. They're pretty simple they're on a black canvas, bright colours, and quite expressive mark-making techniques I used to create the line work. They're a series of circles. This is a common moffat for community, meeting, waterholes, place of gathering in contemporary Indigenous art between Aboriginal peoples. So I use that as this idea of place. So it's representing each region in Western Australia. So Southwest, Kimberley, Pilbara, Goldfields, and there's a few more I can't name off the top of my head. I've used this kind of singular repetitive circle, and then I've used lines off connecting those circles. And again, they're quite expressive mark making. And then you have colours move from blues, yellows and whites to reds and blues and reds and greens, reflecting the region. Down here in the southwest, you have lots of, great beaches, white sand, green, and, colours like this. And then as you move up to like the Kimberley and then you move out to the Goldfields, it gets really red. And I guess I was just trying to make things look diverse in terms of colour palette, and then use similar moffats and graphics to show that it's very much the same still, though. There's this connection through culture, people, state, and whatever else.
For Tyrown, the project with Australia Post and UnitedMake was another chance to explore not only his identity and connection to country, it was also a chance to figure out best practice. It raised important questions on how First Nations artists and clients should work together, from the briefing to the concept to the execution.
I think Australia Post really enjoyed my concept off the back. They didn't have too much feedback. I had a pretty clear vision. They knew what I was going for, which is always good. When a client sometimes will come to you and go, do what you want, and then you go do what you want, and then they go, well, no, this is not what we wanted. It's like, well, you said do what you want. But Mond and Australia Post definitely didn't do that. They gave me lots of room, creative flexibility. And I think with my portfolio and what concept I brought to them, they were pretty confident what was going to be created.
When I started UnitedMake, one of the main things was relationship building and genuinely getting to know people and seeing what their strengths were. One of the things when we started talking to First Nations or different artists, it was really from a place of curiosity and understanding and an open heart to just make sure that we're doing the right thing. I think also the main thing is to understand that it's not tokenistic, It's not a relationship where, we love you and leave you. It's a relationship that's built over time like good friendships.
Tyrown and Mond both spoke warmly about their shared experience on the Australia Post Commission. Words like respect, curiosity and transparency were at the heart of those experiences. But for Tyrown, it's not always gone that way. He's learned from experience that not every client or agency knows how to work well with First Nations creatives.
I mean, there's some glaring red flags. Like I had one brief once upon a time that, they were creating an Indigenous artwork and they were saying this is the Aboriginal word for hello. And I was like, well, it's not the Aboriginal word for hello, because that's like saying bonjour is European for hello. Like there was just a lot of miseducation. And I just sent him a few emails and I was like, you gotta localize this information and make it correct. And then I never heard back from him. So
I think the brief is sometimes the most exciting part of a project because you can really define the problem. What I would really start to look at is understanding what the core part of the project that you're trying to do. And rather than thinking of it as bringing it back to the beginning, just some wallpaper, what are some of the core messages that you want the artwork or the sculpture or the installation or the architecture to be? And one of the most powerful things you can start doing in the brief is start imagining these narratives playing out and putting yourself in the shoes of the artist. And one of the things that we always talk about is this thing called layers. So layers in design being in sustainability, being cultural, sort of understanding, functionality, form, aesthetics. And then we sort of go down those layers to see, what is priority and which ones do we need to celebrate.
Respect feels like, just giving me flexibility and feeling like my artwork, my opinion based off of my profession is valued, not just like, nitpicking and saying, or shifting the brief or like, telling me to create a pink rabbit. And when I go away and create a pink rabbit, they want a red dragon. It's like, I can't work on a shifting brief. It's not feasible. Like, you need to have the same idea all the way through, and that when I go back for rounds of feedback, that idea gets stronger, not less so. I think when people give feedback, especially for big organizations, they need to be briefing the people they're getting feedback from as well. Like, they need to be giving, here's the artwork, here's what we've told the artist to do.
Mond Qu from UnitedMake also believes clients and agencies have a responsibility to educate themselves before working with First Nations creatives. And he argues that clients need to champion the artists throughout the commissioning period.
Any project that has any significance always has pressure, always has stresses involved. You always want to be on the same team, but you're trying to get the best out of the project. I think one of the main things to make sure of is the vision, that you never lose the vision, because what happens is that, budget comes into play, timing comes into play, delays come into play, logistics come into play. But finally, when the vision is all there and all the stakeholders are invested in that vision, it makes the project so much easier, because then it doesn't get derailed. Because if the story is clear and everyone sort of believes in that story, then it's a lot easier to work with those people.
When you're creating Indigenous art, there is an expectation for it to look and feel Indigenous, and especially because Indigenous people have that association as well. That's not created out of a vacuum. Like, I do a lot of stuff for health, and it's important to communicate health to Indigenous people and to connect to them. So having something that looks and feels Indigenous is important. Sometimes, clients will come and say, like, look, we know Indigenous artwork is this vast thing and we want to push the boundaries and see what comes out of it. And, you as an Indigenous person create Indigenous art because it's based off your unique experience. So it does happen sometimes, but not too often. And it depends on the client, depends what they're wanting, depends on the institution. Culturally as well, there's just things that sometimes it might be into a grey area, so I'll keep that out because it's safer, or, I just don't particularly want to share that aspect of culture in a corporate setting, I guess, because there's things around licensing and ownership and things like that to consider.
Tyrown was a fantastic artist, very young, very energetic, and we found his unique position of bringing First Nations ideas and cultures with the modern touch. So he would translate all his ideas into the digital medium first, and once he was happy with it, then translate it back out into the physical canvas. And his title of his piece was Way Out West, which was a response to the sort of theme that we gave him called Networks and Connections. And Tyrown was able to beautifully capture the different landscapes and different images from the coastal lines of Perth all the way into the red hot center of Wheatbelt. And the way that he connected together, the way he was storytelling it, and the way that he drew it was absolutely beautiful.
Tyrown has some thoughts on the work clients can do to work better with First Nations creatives. especially ones who are early in their career.
If you're going to educate yourself, it should probably be localized knowledge first. I mean, local councils have stuff on their website. Surely you know some Aboriginal person you're going to ask questions to. It's not that there should be always being asked about Aboriginal things, but like there's stuff out there. Like a lot of companies have their own, or not a lot, but like more and more companies are getting their own like advisory groups and stuff like this. And if it's, or like they have, some type of Indigenous-led group. And if it's from them and it's from an Indigenous space, then I think it should be fine. But like you're hiring an Indigenous person, so ask for their cultural feedback and be open to it. Don't just be like, yeah, this is what we're doing because this is what we're doing.
Tyrown's work blends fine art, community projects and commercial commission. And in his practice, he's exploring the range of identities and cultural knowledge he carries. And like everyone, he's still learning how to do it all well.
Even in my own creative, like it was just kind of like, oh, yes, Aboriginal cultural license to everything. And then you kind of start learning, it's like, no, it's not like that. You don't have just this endless tap of being Aboriginal. It's like localized within your specific culture and area. So like, yeah, there are things you can comment generally as being an Aboriginal person and things that are shared, but it's more important to share like your stories from your own lineage and stories from your cultural group, because that makes it stronger. It makes your artwork stronger and it keeps your specific culture going whilst also tapping into and sharing this collective idea of being Aboriginal. Like, some people feel really empowered by their culture and they just want to make cultural art. I've always thought of like my Aboriginal Indigenous identity being a part of who I am, not all of who I am. So there's things I want to speak to directly as an Aboriginal person, and then there's things I want to speak to as just someone who's watched cartoons, who likes watching rugby league or likes whatever else. So yeah, you can, if you feel like that you've got a lot of different things to say, yeah, sure, have different separate practices and do different things. But if you really, really strong in your culture and that's all you want to express, then by all means do that.
That was artist and designer Tyrown Waigana and Mond Qu, the director of creative design agency UnitedMake. You can find out more of Tyrown's work through Solid Lines social and website solidlines.agency. Our thanks to Tyrown and Mond. On the next episode, we hear about a project Solid Lines did with artist Ryan Dank and publishers HarperCollins. They worked on a children's picture book called Learning Country, a First Nations journey around Australia's traditional place names.
When I started painting, I asked my grandmother, I said, can I paint this? Can I make a living from this? Is this something I can continue? I just make sure that I know what I can paint. I make sure that my grandmother and my family have painted these things before me.
We're afraid of things all the time, and so it's perfectly acceptable to be afraid of things. I guess what's not acceptable is to not do anything about it, to not educate yourself.
That's next up on Solid Yarns. This podcast was produced by Nicola St. John, Janik Rogers and Kimberly Lee at RMIT University in Naarm, Melbourne. Music by James Howard. Original music commissioned by Australian Dance Theatre for the Third, choreographed by Artistic Director Daniel Riley. This program was made possible with support from the Alistair Swain Foundation. Find out more at alistair-swain-foundation.org.